Here, and just let me get this on you in a good way.
And I can scoot this back. I don't need to be this close.
Yeah.
Back here. Like, center me between.
And maybe up just a little bit so we see you just a little bit closer. So if you can see you in there, you know you're good. Okay.
Yay. So it's going right now, right?
I think it's good.
Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Sorry about the technical issues, but we think we got it figured out. Okay, so welcome today. We are excited for the workshop. There's a couple of announcements that I need to make. First of all, you should have gotten an email about judging for festival and locations. If you did not, then check your junk mail, right?
But there is a caveat to that email.
Okay.
They didn't check with me before they sent it out. We have applied at the college. We are half approved on the way Tuesday.
Okay.
So just keep watching for that. We might.
Okay. So there might be some adjustments.
We might need to be back up there.
Okay, so maybe a little bit at the college. We'll see what happens. Hopefully, keep your fingers crossed. The other thing that I wanted to say, and most of you here are people who volunteer a lot, but we do need more volunteers to help with the association. So if you have an inkling to volunteer, let me know. Anyone who is participating via the live stream, call me and we will get you set up. There are some positions that are fairly easy and simple, and then there's some that are more involved. So if you are willing and able to help, we would love to have you. And then one other thing, the UVMTA festival will be March 14th, correct? Or the UVMTA, your recital, sorry, the recital.
Oh.
The recital.
You started giving me
Yes, sorry.
No, well, it's just a recital, a
Yes.
student recital.
A student recital.
Not a festival. just a
Sorry, I
recital.
said it wrong.
No, that's okay.
A student recital, March
It's right
14th,
here.
and it will be here. If you have students that are interested in participating, there's signups out in the foyer, and or you can let Paula know, right? Okay, and I think that's it. We'll turn the time over to Jessica to introduce our presenter. Okay.
All right, we're excited to have Dr. Claire Thueson with us. She is an in-demand collaborative pianist in the Upper Valley and currently teaches theory and piano skills at BYU, Idaho. She received her Doctor of Musical Arts in Piano Performance from the University of Utah as a student of Dr.
Vedrana Subotic.
Vedrana, okay. Subotic?
Yes.
Okay. And her Master's in Music degree in Piano Performance from the Thorne School of Music at the University of Southern California. She received her Bachelor of Music degree in Piano Performance from BYU, Idaho, and was a frequent winner of local, regional, and state piano awards in Idaho. She won the Northwest title in Young Artist Piano in 2015, competed at the national level of the MTNA Young Artist Competition, and performed with the Idaho Fall Symphony as a winner of their Young Artist Competition. Former piano teachers include Jeffrey Okay, yes. Norman Krieger, Dr. Stephen Thomas, Gary Amano, Cheryl Hansen, and was a student of Anton Nail at the Aspen Music Festival and School. Dr. Thueson currently resides in Rexburg and is a busy mom of 2 toddler boys. All right, so we'll turn the time over to Dr. Thueson.
Thank you. Thank you for braving the cold and being here this morning. Like she said, I'm Dr. Claire Thueson. I'm really excited to be here today and with whoever's here today. I grew up here in Rexburg. I have so much respect for so many of you in this room, and it feels backwards to be here speaking and not sitting and listening. So today I'm going to present to you my thoughts and my research on the concept of musical interpretation. Music is so fascinatingly dynamic, in that one piece can sound thousands of different ways depending on who's playing it. However, at the same time, classical music especially is defined so much by that special, specific historical style that we're charged as teachers to pass on and preserve. I've spent a lot of energy as a graduate student and now as a professional finding what I believe to be the correct balance between those two parameters, the role of the performer and interpreter and our role as teachers and preservers of classical tradition. So as a student, I was obedient and precocious. Maybe I'm remembering myself as more virtuous than I actually was. I suppose if Cheryl was here, she could confirm. I was trained in the Suzuki method, and so I grew up listening to my repertoire on a CD. My mom would wake us up in the morning, and as we got ready for school and had our breakfast, we would listen to our Suzuki CD. She was a good companion in music study. And I would obediently phrase and interpret my pieces as I heard in recordings, or as I was told to or demonstrated to by my teacher. Because of the strong oral background that's emphasized in the Suzuki method, I had a pretty good sense of musicality and phrasing, but I never felt completely empowered to describe or quantify the musical choices that I was making. Later as a high schooler, I attended a music camp at Utah State. And in a lesson with a guest artist, the guest artist asked me, well, how do you think this should sound? I was playing a Mozart sonata. And she said, well, where should this phrase lead? What do you want to do here? And I was petrified. I was a really stressed type A sort of kid. I still am stressed in type A. The thought of making a suggestion and having that suggestion be incorrect just made me want to melt into the floor and disappear. Our students often have similar problems. Either they're like me and they want so badly to be good and obedient that they don't feel empowered to make their own musical decisions, or without the proper background and knowledge, they simply don't have the tools to even begin to consider their role as an interpreter of music. I feel that it wasn't really until I was a graduate student that I felt truly confident in asserting my own creative ideas about my music. In some ways, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to create rogue students who are playing Bach with pedal and rubato as if it were Chopin. Performance practice and historical accuracy are an important starting point. But I think much of my comfort as an interpreter came once I felt like I had studied that historical performance practice and tradition to the point where I felt like I could be creative in my performances without worrying about doing something that was historically inappropriate. So when it comes to performance practice, things like correct ornamentation, use of pedal, rubato, that could encompass an entire lecture series that would span several months and would probably be really boring. So I took 2 semesters worth of classes in my doctorate degree alone, just talking about historical performance practice. And the problem with that is so much of it is guesswork by musicologists anyway, right? A good rule of thumb when it comes to historical performance practice is that the spectrum changes, but not the methodology. So let me elaborate. I'll use rubato as an example. You can stretch time a little bit in music of Bach, in Baroque music. Something like an agogic accent at the end of a cadence. You set the cadence down, you slow down a little bit at the finish. It's nice and it's musical and it finishes off a piece nicely. You're not going to push and pull tempo throughout like you would in something like Chopin or Schumann, because it would be historically incorrect. However, the same rubato in a piece by Chopin can be used much more liberally, and without it, the music lacks its identifying emotion. So we can look at a concept like pedal or rubato, and generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, we can say the earlier the music, the less you use it, the later the music, the more you use it. That's oversimplifying a really complicated issue, but it's a good starting point. I also have a book that I highly suggest for people who don't feel totally comfortable asserting historical fact in interpretation. Even now, after 3 music degrees, I often hesitate to tell someone, well, play it like that, without checking myself first. A pianist and teacher by the name of Deborah Rambo Sim wrote a fantastic book called Playing Beyond the Notes. She was a student of Menahem Pressler at Indiana, who was also the teacher of my teacher in my doctorate degree. And so she suggested this book to me as a resource as I was writing my dissertation. And in this book, she breaks down so many small elements of musical playing. It is specifically geared towards pianists, but can apply, I think, a lot of places. She talks about use of pedal, articulation, rubato, interpretation of dynamic markings and slurs, how to deal with markings in the scores and interpret those. Overall, it's just a good read and also a great reference. So instead of spending a lot of time today focusing on nitty-gritty details of interpretation, I usually direct people to that book. So that was called Playing Beyond the Notes, and it's by Deborah Rambo Sim. And it's a really...
Spell that last name.
S-I-M.
Just-
Yeah. M as in music. So when it comes to empowering our students as interpreters, I find high quality recordings to be a great starting point. My experience as a child listening to recordings and also growing up in a home where I was always listening to music was so important. Students need to hear music to make music. Shinichi Suzuki pioneered this idea of music as its own language that children need to hear in order to learn. And obviously that's something that's the methodology with which I was taught. So I'm a big proponent of that idea. So try having your students listen to more than one recording of a piece. Different pianists or violinists or whatever will play the same piece differently. And the ability to point out differences in tempo or dynamics or phrasing will start students on a path to recognizing and being able to make choices about what they like from an interpretive standpoint. Now with streaming platforms and YouTube, it's so easy to hear several recordings. You just have to make sure they're good ones. You know, the accessibility is a double-edged sword. But just being able to say, this performer slowed down here, and this one didn't, or this recording was faster, this one was louder, this one played more gently, this pianist played more aggressively, this one had sharper articulation, opens a student's mind to the idea that there isn't just one correct way to play a piece of music. Also in lessons, you can encourage them to try different passages in different ways. Try slowing down here. All right, now play it straight. Which one do you like better? Just the idea that they can do that, I think, starts unlocking students to think more creatively. So Italian pianist and composer Alfredo Casella wrote a really great article that kind of dissects this delicate relationship between performer and composer. Casella has a great perspective because he both wrote and performed music. And I have a quote from him that I want to share. He says, "From the recent controversies on the problem of musical interpretation, there has clearly emerged the difficulty of defining the relations between creator and interpreter, or composer and performer." You could also fill in those words. According to some, the task of the performer is to fulfill itself in a scrupulously precise reproduction of the graphic signs of the composer. According to others, the performer is rather to be the very creator of a new artistic reality. In probability, the truth lies midway between these theses. End quote. So he's saying either our task is to be scrupulously committed to the score and reproduce exactly what's written, or is our role a creator for a new artistic reality? And as with most things in life, the answer usually lies in the middle, right? So with this dichotomy in mind, it's fair to assert that a complete, educated, interpretive approach to any piece of music should include two paths of consideration. The first is our interpretation needs to be supported by analysis, or essentially what's written in the score. If somebody writes that it's piano, we can't play it forte. If it's slurred, we probably shouldn't play it dry. If there's accents on every single note, probably shouldn't play it softly with pedal, right? This would also encompass the historical accuracy of performance practice that we discussed before. We have to make our choices within the parameters of what's appropriate for Baroque music or classical music, etc. The second is that we should also consider interpretation supported by our own personal connection to the music. Leaning too much into the first produces unimaginative mechanical reproductions of notes written on a page, whereas too much emphasis on the second robs a piece of the brilliance that was given to it by its creator, the composer. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I know from experience that listening to me talk for an hour straight puts people to sleep. Or maybe that's just because I teach theory at 7:45 in the morning, so maybe I won't take it personally. People sleep through class. It probably doesn't have anything to do with me. So I'm going to play a little bit. I'm much better at playing than I am at talking. So my doctoral dissertation focused on this idea of interpretation, specifically in the realm of modern minimalist music. This is obviously music that we don't see as often. Our students don't play it very often, but I actually think it could be incorporated more often. Much more often than it is, and a good grasp of how to teach and interpret it with our students would unlock those possibilities. So I took the first book of Etudes by Philip Glass, and my research used it as a case study in how to analyze and then interpret minimalist music. Philip Glass, if you're unfamiliar, is an American composer. He's most recognized as the principal figure in the establishment of minimalism in the 20th century. Minimalist music is very textural. It focuses on really small musical motifs that are repeated and transformed to a really extreme degree that creates its own unique patchwork and aesthetic. So I'm going to play one of these etudes for you. It's a book of 10. I'm going to play one for you for a second to get you familiar with the character of the music. And then we're going to go through and talk about exactly how I navigated the interpretation and analysis of this music. Okay, easy. All right, so modern music like this frequently has the benefit of a composer being alive to consult on interpretation. Unlike a messy Beethoven score where a matter of hastily scribbled articulation and his really bad handwriting can be a point of contention for performers and musicologists indefinitely, a living composer can be inquired upon directly for their thoughts and intent when it comes to their own music. In the case of these etudes, Glass himself recorded them, leaving an oral blueprint of his own interpretation of the music. So that begs the question then, in the event that it's available, is the composer's own interpretation the final word? Before I actually began research and writing my dissertation, I performed these etudes a lot. And after one recital, the faculty head of my graduate committee came to me and complained about some of the tempos that I had chosen, saying that they didn't match what was written in the score. And they didn't. I had taken some liberty for sure. But I went back that night and I was feeling just a little belligerent after being called out and discovered that Glass's own recordings didn't match the tempos written in the score. And so I felt vindicated. But after I felt vindicated, I felt confused. So what was the final word? The score or the recording or what I thought as a performer? So speaking about composers performing their own music, back to this article by Alfredo Casella, he boldly asserted, quote, "An author is only one among other interpreters and not always the best," end quote. So there are a handful of limitations on composers. First is their own technical facility. I'll be the first to tell you that while completely brilliant, Philip Glass is not necessarily an excellent virtuosic pianist. So there are limitations in what you can convey emotionally if your technical skill is not at a place where someone else's might be. Their own skill as an interpreter. Composers are interpreters, same as performers, right? Or even their skill at notating exactly what they intend in the score. There could be limitations where they feel or think something, but what they write might not convey that in the way that they intended to. Casella cited Beethoven as a great master of notating his exact intentions. Debussy is another great example of a composer who writes exactly what he wants. Some composers don't give you much to work with. So this becomes especially obvious in the music of Philip Glass. I've probably, well, not even probably, I know I have. I've listened to every recording there is of these pieces as part of my research. And while many of them are really fantastic, I find that there are some that are not quite as good. And the ones that are not as good fall into two different categories. Either they lean too much into the aesthetic, interpretive, emotional side of the music, too much pedal, not enough precise attention to the notes and articulation in the score. It all starts to sound kind of muddy and ethereal, and you lose kind of that mathematic, motoric energy that happens in minimalist music. The other side of that is that there are performers that are too mathematic. They lean too much into the repetitive nature of the music. They forget to phrase and make it musical. Usually people who say they don't like minimalist music are listening to recordings like this because they find that it sounds repetitious and kind of jarring, right? For his own part, it seems to me, based on my research, that Philip Glass is very aware and supportive of a performer's role in absorbing and then subsequently interpreting and performing his own music. On his website, he has pages for all of the music that he's written. When you go in and read the web page for the etudes, he lists all of the recent recordings that have been released. And the entry reads, "Here is the latest list of interpretations of the Glass piano etudes." So he lists these recordings as interpretations of his music. Bruce Brubaker is a pianist and a friend of Philip Glass. And he recounts a story once where he was about to sit down and play something for the composer. And he said to him, "Let's see what you have to say in my piece." He also mentions Glass as an advocate for the autonomy of performers. No matter what the performer's intentions or the composer's wishes, each new reading adds to, reveals more of, and even alters the complete identity of the music being played and heard. That's a quote from Philip Glass. So armed with all of this information, I set out to understand what was written in the score first so that I could add my own personal interpretation and then hopefully present a complete performance of the piece of music. So we're going to go through to the next etude in the book. I just played for you etude number 2. We're going to look a little bit at etude number 3. My first issue as I started to learn this piece was how much pedal to use. We've all had this problem before in just about every piece ever, right? There is not a single pedal marking in this score. However, it's obviously used in his recordings and in other recordings. So what was I supposed to do? I wasn't going to play it totally dry. Well, the score said there's no pedal, so I'm not going to use pedal. Clearly, he intended for pedal to be used, but I suppose he just trusted the performer's good taste. Seems bold of him, but it turned out to be okay. I found the composer's highly deliberate use of slurring to be a great guide to me in how to manage that. The slurs not only denote notes to be emphasized, but they also guide the interpreter through the musical lines and content that Glass deems important to group and consider together. So there are other things that can inform our use of pedal besides just pedal markings, right? So throughout this etude, you're going to hear an alternation between slurring 2 groups of 3/8 notes across a 3-bar measure or 3 groups of 2. So 2 groups of 3, no wait, yes, 2 groups of 3. It's 2 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 2. And what I decided to do was pedal, though it wasn't indicated, assisted me in kind of highlighting the difference between those patterns. So longer slurred groups of 3 notes or more, I decided I would add a slightly depressed pedal to connect them, Whereas shorter groups of 2, I left dry to emphasize the difference in rhythm. So there was no pedal in the score, but I interpreted other markings in the score to inform my decisions. So let's listen to etude number 3, and you will hopefully be able to hear the slurring and the reasons that I made the decisions that I did. Let's all just hope that the bow stays open. All right, I'm going to jump ahead now to the 7th etude. So really what I'd like to do is just not talk at all for you. That would be much better. So this etude, the 7th, reads very much like a traditional theme and variations, where it takes one harmonic idea and then transforms it several times. In this case, recognizing that theme as it was tucked into the texture throughout was essential to me in finding a good musical interpretation. Once I determined the best way to phrase the beginning, that was my blueprint for everything else. We often don't have to reinvent the wheel. So much of music is based on repetition. And when something shows up again, we can either make the choice to interpret it, phrase it, articulate it, pedal it the same way, or we can decide, hey, this will really highlight the recapitulation if I do something slightly differently. So we don't have to come up with a perfect interpretation for every single note. The way that music relates to itself is a good tool. So let's listen to the theme and variations, etude 7. So to conclude everything I've presented to you this morning, with so much information available to us, considering history, compositional process of music, reasonably detailed scores, and so many quality recordings, the performer and interpreter's role is a delicate one. Certainly personal connection of a musician to music is valid and endlessly important. But just as important is to honor a compositional process and lifelong influences of the composer in which a performer takes absolutely no part. Only after understanding the music contained in the score is then the interpreter free to add the final necessary element to any complete musical performance, which is personal touch and emotion. I'm going to end today by playing the final etude in the book, which is number 10, after which I'd be happy to answer any questions about interpretation or Philip Glass or anything else. Pages were behaving this morning when I practiced it, so let's hope they say it. right, that's all I've got. Any questions? Yes.
Do you think there's any value to like not letting a student listen to too many recordings at all and just have them look at the score and kind of just intuitively come up with their own interpretation?
I think so.
And
I
then
think
maybe down the road, if they're like really
Yes.
stuck on something, like what is he even going for?
yes.
You know?
I think it probably depends on the student. I
Okay.
think if you have students that are generally pretty intuitive when it comes to their musical choices, I do think that kind of independence is a nice idea, to not let them be influenced by anything. If they already have a pretty good grasp of like classical style or Baroque style, you know they're not going to do something, wild and out of control, to let them, come up with their own interpretation before they're influenced by something. Yeah, I think there are some students where that would work really well. And then I think there's some students who need a little bit of guidance. It probably just depends on the spot they're at. I think more advanced students can take more independence.
I just have a comment for some beginner students.
Yeah.
Because this can start young, and you have some kids that come in and they just want to say, I changed it like this. And I personally love it.
Yes.
Sometimes if they're doing it for festival, I'll say, that's great. After festival, you can play it that way. For festival, your judges expect you to
Yes.
play it the way the score
Yes.
says, But I've noticed that even little things, students that don't have that natural, like I have
Yes.
students that have really hard times making decisions.
Mhm.
Like, which song do you want? I don't know, what do you want me to do?
Yes.
And
That was
just
me.
Encouraging just any level of increasing their independence.
Yes.
Like, what do you think of this fingering? Does that feel okay to you? Because you could use a different fingering. Let's try this one. Which one do you like? Just giving them little, we're not talking about interpretive class stuff.
Yes.
Little, just helping them to increase their independence a little bit.
Yes.
Has been helpful for me.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Oh, good. More.
It's interesting to me, as my students play, and I try to increase their expression, I will say, if this was the background music to a movie,
Yes.
what is happening in the movie? And they have a really hard time. It's almost like they're looking for the right answer, what
Yes.
I want to hear.
Yes.
And so it's really hard for them to be their creative
Mhm.
self.
Well, and I find this, everything in my life comes back to parenting toddlers right now, because that's what I do day in and day out. I don't ask him, what do you want to wear today? Because the answer will probably be my excavator pajamas, right? I say, do you want to wear your camel pants or do you want to wear your black pants today? Give him two, right? That is giving him the sense of, I get to make a choice here. I'm gaining some independence without leaving it wide open to, well, I don't know, or picking something that's just completely out of left field. So I find with students, it's helpful to say, okay, not, well, what do you think of this? But does this sound more gentle and lyrical to you, or does it sound more angry and aggressive? Giving them a couple of choices. Would you like to slow down here, or would you like to keep it straight, right? Sometimes help students that have that kind of problem with, well, I don't know, I can't make a decision. When you narrow down the choices, I think it helps. We had one more here, and then.
I got a lot. Go ahead. Well, okay. One was how has your relationship to these etudes changed? Because sometimes when I'm learning a piece for a long time, I feel like there's this golden window when it's good.
Yeah.
And I spend too much time after that.
Yes.
And so, but I don't think I've ever like dissected any piece that intensely.
Oh, me neither.
What you said,
This is the one and only.
And so how has your relationship to this changed now? 'Cause
Thank you. I've taken breaks from it too.
Yeah.
So I have always been a fan of Philip Glass. I heard his music first his orchestral music first as a teenager, and have always liked Philip Glass. I stumbled across these ones when I was in my master's degree. My husband was living in Salt Lake, and I was living in Los Angeles, and so I would fly home a lot to see him. And so I always had headphones in, listening to things in the airport. And this came up on a radio once, and I heard it. I thought, this is interesting. I know I like Glass. Let me look at this. And so it started. My relationship started as, I'm intrigued with this music because I know I like this composer. When I went to start my analysis and start learning it, there's nothing written about it. There's nothing. You can learn a Beethoven sonata and you can go read articles and say, oh, this is what was happening in his life. This is what, I had none of that. And so I said, well, okay, I'm going to create it then. And that's really what my dissertation ended up being. Before this morning, I haven't touched these pieces in about a year. Yeah, that's how long ago I had my second kid. It's been a year since and I find that beneficial. You talk about this golden window where you really feel like you have a good handle on something.
And it's
And
still fun to play.
it's fun to play and you like it. Stuff gets better when it marinates. So I find it very helpful to step away from things and come back to them later. Sometimes that's helpful with students too. If they've hit a wall and they don't like something anymore, they've been working on it for too long, say, okay, let's take a break from this for 6 months. Let's come back to it and revisit it later. And when you look at something where you have that basis of understanding, but a refreshed perspective, I find very helpful. So, here and then there.
I was just gonna say, I had a teacher that always made me make up a story to go along with my
Yes.
talk.
Yeah.
And that really did help me to put in my own
Yeah.
emotion.
Especially for really imaginative people. They like that programmatic association. Yes.
So I'm curious, when you're teaching
Yes.
a lesson, I'm assuming you don't sit on a chair with your arms folded while you're trying to
Yes.
help this all happen.
Yes.
So what are some of the things that you have learned work well to motivate students to
Yeah.
create?
I think demonstration is the first step. It's a student sometimes doesn't know that they can play something differently than how they've heard. So to sit down and say, okay, what if you play it like this? And I'll be like, well, oh, what if you actually try it like this? Do you like that better? So again, giving choices, I think demonstration is actually probably in the same way that I think recordings are really important. I think demonstration from a teacher is actually the first step. And if they see you interpreting, I think it helps them recognize that they can do the same.
Do you do it with them?
Well, and
Or is
I
it
actually
like-
don't teach that. I classroom teach so much more. So yes, ideally, I think it's something that it's a collaborative process. I usually stand in front of a class and lecture these days, which is a little bit different. But yes, I think there's something really nice about, I mean, every piano teacher I've ever had has sat on the bench and played with me. And I think the collaborative effort of, hey, let's try some things together. You do it this way, I'll do it this way. And letting them work with you, I think is helpful. It gives them a little bit of confidence, I think, to have somebody taking that interpretive process at the same time, instead of just throwing them in the deep end of the pool and saying, hey, what do you think? I don't think people I don't like that. So, yes.
So just in the rare time that the interpretation is totally bad,
Yes.
how do you approach that?
I think we can pass the buck a little bit onto historical accuracy. Instead of saying, hey, that's bad, I don't like that, because you don't want to do that to a student who's created something. Say, you know what, this is really interesting, really fascinating. You know, it's like the compliment sandwich. I really like what you did here. Now, let's talk about style in Mozart. Let me teach you some things about Mozart historically. Here's how music was played. Here's how this works. We need to honor what he wrote and the time period it was written in. Maybe let's try it like this. And then at that point, I think sometimes students that have a hard time with maybe getting bored or not really being receptive to historical performance practice, those are the students that also benefit from fun pieces, you know, things that are more modern, in books that maybe have, you know, pictures, words, associations, things that they can kind of have fun with and have a little more freedom when they're not constrained by the historical performance practice. But yeah, I usually like to pass the buck on to someone else. It's not me saying you can't do this, it's Mozart. Anything else? All right, thanks for your time this morning, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And if you feel like signing up to help on your way out, feel free to do so. And is there anything else that you guys need to share? Yes.
We have changed the scholarship audition date to the week after festival.
Okay,
To
so
April
the
16th.
16th.
Mhm.
Okay, so scholarships will be April 16th, the week after festival. Okay, good to know.
April 16th.
I should know this, but are we having an alternate night, or is it only you record? You can't go on the day of festival? What's?
Do we know yet?
Oh, yeah.
So we think there will be an alternate night and the virtual recordings too.
Does everybody like the virtual? Because once we get back to the college.
It's trickier.
I will say, it took, because we're not professionals, took my daughter hours after the recording was done. Just
To get it
hooked
submitted.
up. And so now the thought of going through that is just like, oh man, it's really hard.
Okay, so maybe we will discuss it and we will let everybody know. So there will at least be an alternate night. Okay,
Okay, good.
anything else? Okay, thank you for coming and.
The brother